Welcome, everybody. This is Michelle Archer. We are talking about the mindset makeover, and this is session 2 for us this week. We had a little conversation about our takeaways from session 1. That's in a different recording, and you can find that in the portal on the Direct Sales Institute. But we're awfully glad that you're here or listening to the replay because the replays are really important. That's why I make them available. So we're going to build on what we did last week, which was talking about negative or unhelpful thoughts. And we're going to talk about our personal narrative. And we all have one. And it either propels us forward or holds us back. And for most of us, it holds us back. But the good news is the pen's in your hands. So here's one of my favorite quotes. Wherever you look, you will find evidence to support your story. And this is where your personal narrative becomes so important. If your personal narrative is, I'm a loser, I'm not good with money, nothing goes right for me, I'll never get promoted, whatever it is negatively, wherever you look, you'll find evidence to that because you've told your brain what to look for. It's a weird little thing. Like if you're looking for cars is a great example. Or like I'm a shoe gal, and you think, oh, I really want a new car, and I think I want this, whatever this is. All of a sudden, when you're driving down the street, everywhere you look will be that car in various colors. It's like a showroom for you because you've told your mind, I'm looking for that. And we tell our mind what we're looking for by the story that we choose to implant in our head. And it's not all of our own will. We'll talk about the 3 ways this story takes shape and what you ultimately have control over all of it. That's the great thing. And I hope that's what you take away from this series is that you have control over the thoughts that go on in your head and definitely your story. So with that in mind, let's talk about your personal narrative. It is that story that you tell yourself, and you might not even know that you're doing it, but that story can sound like 1,000 different things. I'm so stupid. I'm never going to get promoted. I'm such a failure. I'm such a bad mom. I'm just rattling off the ones that I've heard over the years in coaching and training and working with people. And it is so important because it is what you believe about your life and your future, your present, your future, and what's to come. And the thing about it is that each one of us gets exactly what we deserve. And so if you tell yourself that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy, that you're not smart, that you can't go to college, that you're not good at work, that you're one of the lowest performers, that you're not going to get a raise, that you might get fired. Holy cow, people tell themselves this all the time. You get exactly what you think you deserve. So it's really, really important how we shape this narrative in our head. So let's take a look at the making of a personal narrative, what you chose for yourself and what was kind of given to you. Oh, sorry, I didn't flash in these. There's what I said. It's the story you believe about yourself. It's a story you reinforce, and it's reinforced everywhere you look. And it's important because it governs what we end up with, because we end up with what we believe we deserve. So there's 3 categories I'm going to talk to you about personal narrative factors. One is the things that we see, and I call these personal truths. And these are mostly modeled behavior, primarily from young childhood. We're so impressionable at that age, and everyone has these personal truths. And I air quote them because they're not actually true. There's something that our little developing psyches snatched out of a conversation or out of a group, a family gathering or whatever. But these truths are the hard truths, the real truth that we tell each other when our social masks, when we tell ourselves when our social masks are off, when we're not around people, when it's just us looking ourselves in the mirror. These are these really hard, critical truths that we say to ourselves. And by and large, they are not helpful. They can hinder us, but big surprise, most of them do not help us just because of, the human condition. So a negative personal truth will hold us back. It will hold us down. It leads us into self-sabotage. There's so many great examples. I know we've got so many people registered for this and they're not logging on live. That's a self-sabotage. That is denying yourself an opportunity to grow or to gain a new concept or a new topic because of whatever, and you're probably not even aware of it. That you think, oh, I don't want to deal with that tonight. It's too hard. I don't want to think about it. Really, it comes down to sometimes being really busy. Sometimes it just comes down to being really scared that something might change the status quo and we don't know how to deal with it. So I applaud you guys who are on live and listening to the replay, equally as important. So I'll just share with you my, as an example of a personal narrative, my personal narrative growing up that I just, as long as I can ever remember, just like the thoughts in our heads, was that things don't end happily. And that was modeled for me everywhere that I looked in childhood. Their marriages did not end happily, relationships did not end happily, entrepreneur, adventures did not end happily. And I even remember, and this is a third category, but I'm not blaming anybody's parents for anything, but I had all of this negative stimuli over nothing ends happily. And I remember flipping through my parents' wedding photo photo book when I was about, I don't know, 7 or 8 maybe, and I knew that they were not happy, and so I flipped through all of these happy pictures, and I got to the end and I thought, "Gosh, I don't know about that." And, my mother was reading me one of those happily ever after books. Cinderella was probably my favorite, and it says, "And they all lived happily ever after." And she looked at me and she said, "That's just that's just bull, honey. Nothing ever ends happily." Did she mean to set me on that path? Of course not. But that became part of my core truth. So you can imagine how helpful that was, right? In life and in everything else, that nothing ever ends happily. So even though that may not have been in the forefront of my brain with everything that I did, it was in the subconscious of my day to day life. Nothing ever ends happily. Why try to succeed? Why work super hard? Why invest in relationships or friendships or whatever it is when nothing ever ends happily? Good gracious. What a sad and terrible way to approach things. And y'all, I was probably 25 years old before I figured this out, that this was something that I was carrying around with me that was really burdening me and keeping me from being successful and doing all the things that I was put here to do. So your personal truth can be anything. I don't deserve to be successful. People don't like me. I know tons of friends. I have lots of customers with abandonment issues, whether they are adopted or, whatever. It's just everybody has something. I'll end up alone. Nobody appreciates me. All of those things. Everybody has something. But again, with the internal dialogue, it's been with us for so long that we don't stop to question that my life doesn't end happy, that nothing ever ends happily. Like that just becomes part of your belief system. And so part of what I want to do for you in this course is all about challenging your belief system, not your faith system, but your belief system, the things that you think, um, and how you approach things. So I think the example that we're using is I'll never be good enough because that's what I hear from women all the time. I'm not enough. I'll never be enough. I'm not good enough. Some riff on that theme and good night. That is a devastating way to think because you're holding yourself up against a level of perfection that can never be achieved. It's not realistic. But so many women do this. So let's look at, let's take people don't like me, for example. If that's your belief system, because of whatever in childhood or whatever messages you received, people don't like me. Maybe I wasn't the fair-haired child, the most popular one, whichever one that everybody liked. Maybe I feel like I wasn't that one. So when we look at that, that belief system affects every interaction you ever have, whether it's at the grocery store or at the bank or in traffic. Everything becomes very personal because I believe that people don't like me. It's not true. It's just how we get up every day and function because it's a takeaway that we have. If that's part of your personal truth, let's talk about sales and entrepreneurship. Excuse me. Although I know I have a lot of people who are in business, just brick and mortar business. You're an employee somewhere or, in charge of employees. So if that's your belief system, no one likes me, every no or every perceived no is catastrophic to you. It's so personal. So I'll use the example of sales. I know a lot of people who leave the sales field because they just really can't handle this. And instead of understanding that personal narrative is part of the problem and correcting that, which fixes everything else, all the other personal relationship things that you have, and why you think whatever someone stole your parking place at Kroger or whatever your grocery store is, they just leave sales and they think that will fix it. It doesn't fix it because your personal narrative persists. So, in the case of sales, if you say to somebody, "Oh my gosh, you are going to love this phone. Let me show you what it does." And they say, "No, I like my phone. I don't want to get a new phone." Right? That's okay. That's sales. Some will, some won't. So what? Who's next? It's this law of averages thing. When you sell things for a living, you sell things that you love, but you understand that everybody isn't a buyer. And so, that's the 20% that's not a buyer. You move on. But when you're carrying around this no one likes me piece of the puzzle, you take this whole lifetime of baggage and you drop it in the middle of, would you like to buy this lipstick? Can I sell you this pen? And now this becomes a referendum on your likability and how people frame you and how people think about you. And so it's crippling, of course. This is why some people in sales do better than others. We're not carrying around nobody likes me. We are all carrying around something. Everyone has a garbage bag slung across their shoulder that they are schlepping through life with. But in this particular example, for me, that'd be no big deal. I would know the law of averages. You're part of the 20%. That's a no. That's okay. That's fine. I can't convert everybody. I love it. You may not love it. That's all right. Bless and release. But if I believe that no one likes me, then that becomes a referendum on me. And it's not a rejection of the product. It's a rejection of me on a deeply painful level. So you can begin to see how that holds you back from any level of success that you could possibly have. And if you're working in an office job, a corporate job, and you turn in a report and it gets a bad review and people criticize that, you can very easily internalize that into people just don't like me, right? Silly, just all kinds of silly things. Three people go to lunch, they don't ask you, and all of a sudden it's because nobody likes you, right? Because it goes back to what that belief system is. Now, if your personal narrative is really strong, if your personal truths are strong and healthy, then you're very strong and healthy. And when stuff happens, I was in a class the other day and she used the example of you see somebody out and you know who it is, and you wave and they don't wave back. How do you respond? It's a really fascinating question because if your personal narrative is people don't like me or whatever, it doesn't even have to be that, then you think, oh my gosh, what have I done? Why is she mad at me? Why wouldn't she wave back at me? If your personal narrative is that I'm pretty good with people and they like me and I treat people well and they treat me well, your reaction is, gosh, I need to call and check on her and see if she's okay, or, to make sure that was her or whatever. So you can start to see how it frames how you frame the world. This personal truth piece, which feeds in to the personal narrative. Does anybody have anything to add on that before we move on? I've got some allergies or something. Anyway, oh, all right. So personal truths. These are things that are mostly shown to us. These are things that we see somewhere along the course of our, 80 or 90-year journey around this planet. So personal truth, number one, really important that we identify those for ourselves. And when we talked last week about words, the words that you use with yourself will really help you figure out what that personal narrative is that may not be helping you very much. So let's talk about generational curses. Those are my favorite things. It's not mystical. There's no voodoo here.
So,
Um,
Michelle, can I
yeah,
just
please.
ask something
Yeah,
for
please.
jump in and ask something?
Go ahead.
Um, when I was growing up, I found that because of circumstances in our home, it was just easier for me to do what I was asked, with no questions or anything. And as a result, I've learned not to tell people how I really feel until I go and I go and I go and I go, and then all of a sudden I blow up. Would that fall in the category of I'm not good enough?
It could fall under a couple of categories, like, "I'm not heard," or "My opinion doesn't count." D what resonates with you?
I'm My opinion doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah, very, very often. Yeah, my opinion doesn't count. And so we carry that throughout life. And then eventually you get tired of being quiet, especially when you know that you're right.
Yes.
And we can get very defensive because we're carrying around, nobody listens to me. My opinion doesn't count. Nobody respects me. Nobody respects my opinion. Something in that realm.
Yes, but it's more in my personal life. In my business life, I'm a very respected individual, and people like me, and well, and my friends and stuff too. Like in my personal life, I'm a well-liked person, but I really struggle to say what I feel, and so I just don't say anything
You don't say anything professionally or you don't say anything personally.
personally.
Personally. And so that could be tied into a need to be liked and to not rock the boat. Are you a middle child? What's your birth order?
No, I'm a firstborn.
You're first. We're still peacekeepers. I'm an oldest too.
Yeah,
Um, so
peacekeeper, that's a good word.
yeah, you're because you're the oldest and you're trying to keep everybody from fighting.
Yeah,
So particularly if they're squabbling about things, then you don't want to add to it. But yeah, eventually you just get really, really frustrated. And I can still see how that comes back to a respect thing and a being heard, where I'm the oldest and no one's listening to me. And I've
right.
put up with it about as long as I'm going to. The elder
Yes.
sister has spoken, right? And
Mhm.
so yeah, yeah. So we can kind of carry that around too. And then, family's hard. Family's just that's just part of it. But it can be all of those things. Interesting that you don't run into it as much at work, but you may at work have a high value of authority figures. And so you think they, kn- not that you think they know better than you or that they're in a position of authority. And so you should kind of listen to them, and you may be less likely to get fed up and speak your mind at work with authority figures than you are with your family. Does that feel true?
Um, Not so much with my work life. I think it's been a learned behavior because I've had some very upper management positions where I was supervision, and you have to learn to, when you're training someone or when you're teaching someone or when you have to reprimand somebody, it's just something that you have to do. And but personally, I stew about it for a month before I manage to get the words out to the person that I have to talk to. So
So, well, that's
um
interesting, and this would be a great topic for us to talk about in our one-on-one. But yeah, it's a learned behavior in business. Sometimes we have to be a different person in business than
yes.
personally. Not, the old adage, everything's fair in business is not true, but we do learn to be politically correct or whatever you want to say, not to bring politics into it, but we learn to function in a different realm in a different way.
Yes.
Professionally, yeah, because there's corporate roles. So that's a
Yeah.
great question. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So let's talk about generational curses. One of my favorites. No hoodoo voodoo here, but these are things we are given. So personal truths are things we have seen that were modeled to us mostly when we were young. Our generational curses are things that we are bequeathed by our family. They don't mean to bequeath them to us, but it's their personal challenges that they're encountering, and these are passed down through families, through generations, most often unconsciously, because they wouldn't gift us with these things, these worries or concerns or whatever it is, and they can manifest as negative self beliefs, unhealthy relationships, poverty, cycles of hardship, particularly. I see a lot, and they definitely factor into our personal narrative. So, common examples revolve around scarcity versus abundance. And I think that most of us, and I know Twyla is up there in Canada, but in Canada, US, I mean, I think most of us worldwide, we have so much in common. And one of those things is um, the focus on scarcity. So I can speak to the American experience, which is a lot like how Canada was settled. Is that my grandparents came here out of desperation. I'm Irish. It wasn't great there. We were having that whole potato famine thing. Yeah. It didn't mean we didn't have potatoes. It meant we didn't have anything but potatoes. And people come here seeking refuge from persecution and war and famine and a million reasons. Some people came over on the Mayflower, and that's a wonderful story, but that's not how most of us ended up here. And so we come from generations of people who have functioned in scarcity versus abundance, trying to build a better life. And even when we got here in the great new world, it was still food was scarce and life was hard. And maybe it was cold where you landed if you were there on Plymouth Rock or you headed out west or you navigated the Smokies. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine that. Um, and I think of my grandmother, who would be 110, I think. She lived during the Great Depression, the US Great Depression, and World War II, which were times of deep scarcity where they rationed everything. And my grandmother she did crazy things. Like she would save pieces of sewing, sewing twine, sewing string this long. What are you ever going to do with that long a piece of thread? Nothing. But she learned the hard way, waste not, want not. I mean, they could have done something with it, good Lord knows. And I know that my great grandmother, when it came to food, never wasted anything at all. And so for all of us, most of us, some of us were born with silver spoons. I don't know a lot of those people. And even if they were born with silver spoons, their grandparents weren't. But we were really born out of a scarcity. And so that's where we function more than in abundance. And so scarcity, no strange fact that the word scare starts the word scarcity, when they built us, the younger generation. And I come from farming folks, a hand to plow, where you are grateful for what you've been given. That's what you're going to get. You're not going to get any more. My grandmother used to say all the time, "You get what you get, and you don't pitch a fit." Right, um, a- and which is good. They were humble and God fearing, and they worked the land, and they were grateful for what they had, and all of those things. And those are wonderful. Those are wonderful things. The flip of it was that it was almost, irreverent or, unholy or, unappreciative to say, "Oh, I have big dreams and I wanna go do whatever, and one day I want a house with a pool, or one day I want a fancy car," or whatever. And that was almost like a you were chastised for that because you were just supposed to be grateful. You're supposed to bow your head and be grateful for what was put in front of you. So I ended up a dreamer out of my clan, don't know how. And although I was always grateful for everything that we had, even when it wasn't much, I always thought, one day I might live in a big city or I might, have a big house or, um, you know, things like that. And so these generational curses, which I was able to break, most of my family has not. They're still kind of the same way. We were born poor, we're supposed to be poor, quit bucking the status quo. And meanwhile, you're so well off. Why don't, whatever. Let me come teach you how to break from this mindset of being poor and stuck and whatever that is. Let me show you how to start a business. Let me, let's get you in a program that you can get a better job. You don't have to be stuck where you are. And so that's the generational curse part. And they're very, very hard to break. And by the grace of God, I broke mine. And these can be all kinds of things. They can be bad relationships because that's what's modeled for us. It can be thoughts of some people have an innate fear of the police. It can be thoughts of, well, the rich get richer and us poor folks just get poorer. Well, look, the richer do get richer, and corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes here. But we can still build and grow and build the life that we want to when we put these generational curses aside and decide to be the masters of our own destiny. So I'm just wondering, does any generational curse pop into mind for you all? This is deep stuff. So it's like you have to think about it a little bit, which is why we have a replay. But these generational curses, these are things that are just handed to you. You don't have a lot of control over it. I'm trying to think of another personal example or customer example or client example. But anyway, generational curses, things that are just kind of handed to you. I'm also Irish, and look, I could regale you with stories of Irish need not apply, and that how unembraced we were when we came to this country. And anybody, I'm not sure. I think everybody who came over here, except for maybe the 50 on the original Mayflower, um, nobody was really embraced. The Irish, the Swedes, the whatever. But there's a self-esteem issue that comes with that when you know that your people were only allowed to do menial jobs, pluck chickens and whatever. That's a kind of a generational curse where you feel like I'm less than others because of where I came from. That's a whole big, deep topic. And I'd be curious to hear how it is in Canada, but I think maybe a lot the same there. So then the final piece of the puzzle, I don't know why it keeps doing that, is self-limiting beliefs. And the self-limiting belief piece is a lot about what we talked about last week. Those negative thoughts, those negative thought processes. And that's why I asked you to capture those this week, because that really will give you an indication of what your narrative is. If you think, whatever it is, people don't like me, or I'm so stupid, or I'm too loud, or whatever. These can come from a variety of places, but mostly they were things that we heard, things that people said, maybe, intentionally or unintentionally. Um, and, I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff over the years. Probably as a mother, I said a lot of stuff that I wish I hadn't. But some of these are like, oh, you're just like your mother or your father, not in a well-intended way, or you never finish anything. Your mother might have said exasperatedly with you when whatever, you're so disorganized, your room's a mess. You're just not that good at school. um, there's so many things. And so this is part of it that kind of reinforces those personal truths, those false hoods from childhood, the generational curses that usually go along with the personal truth because all the same people are raising us. And then the words that they use with us along the way that really starts to create this narrative of who I am, and am I worthy, and what do I deserve, and do I deserve more? Dare I even hope for more than I have? So when we are whatever, building a business, raising a family, if we're an entrepreneur, if we are working in a corporate brick and mortar, it's really important to know your worth. And if your personal narrative says that you don't have a lot of worth, it's really hard to be upwardly mobile, to get a promotion, to build a business, to achieve great things, to even make a great difference in your community, because you think, well, who the heck am I? And we talked last week a little bit on the live about imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is so directly tied to your personal narrative that when you kind of step into your greatness, and you're all here to be great in one way or another, when something happens and you step into that greatness, your personal narrative comes along and says, "Pff, that's not who you are. Who do you think you are? Get back down there where you belong," right? We start chastising ourselves. Who's going to listen to you? Who's going to believe you? Why do you get to stand on a stage? Why should you be promoted? Why should you be lead? Or why should you be the VP or whatever it is? Because you and I really know who we are. And our personal narrative tells us that we're down here and this is way far reaching from where we deserve to be. So that personal narrative piece is crucially important in success. Um, I think, gosh, I more than a lot of things, right? Anybody have anything on that before we move on to how do we get over this now? So there's the bad news. So let's get to the good news of self-limiting beliefs. All right, so let's talk about this is a lot to process. So this is why we have these a week apart. I'd almost do them 2 weeks apart, but people would fall off the rabbit trail. So here's how our personal narrative is built. These truths that we pick up that are modeled for us, generational curses and self-limiting beliefs. Excuse me. The great news is the pen is in our hand. Never believe that it isn't. There are things that we cannot change. I can't change that I'm only 5'2". I can't change that I had a kidney transplant. There are always things about our lives that we cannot change, but 90% of it we can change and we can affect. And it starts right here between our own two ears. I don't know what this is all about. Oh, good knows. Goodness knows. So let's talk about flipping the script on this narrative. And this is tough because it's always been there, like the negative verbiage that we talked about last week. So we have to start by identifying the false narrative that's in our head before we can do anything else. We have to find the lies, seek out the lies that ping around in our brains. So start by acknowledging that negative, acknowledging that there is a negative story, and this can be so harder for some than others. That's why I'm here. We have private chat. You have a personal session with me that you can use at any time. That's your phone a friend lifeline anytime you want to use it on any topic. But begin with this narrative, writing it out. What do you say to yourself? And we'll use I'll never be good enough. And this is such a woman thing. Oh my gosh, we beat ourselves to death. I'll never be good enough. So by proxy, I will always disappoint people and let people down. Oh, that's happy, isn't it? Because somewhere along the way you were told and you learned and it was modeled for you that you weren't good enough or you couldn't be good enough. There's a whole story. I could be a therapist at this point. But anyway, and what's so hard about this is we've never challenged these thoughts that just run free in our head. And so that's the hard part. That's why we started last week with challenging the negative thoughts so that we can start to hear them and call them out as false. And we can hear this false narrative as it plays out in our head and with bits and pieces of the negative thought processes. So if you're stuck this week, so this is going to be homework piece number one or success piece number one is identify your false narrative. And I think I said mine was nothing ever ends happy, right? Holy cow, that is so fatalistic. I mean, you might as well just go back in the backyard and bury yourself now if nothing ever ends well. But I lived like that for probably 25 years. So if you get stuck about what's true and what's false, write it all down and then go back to the ultimates, the never, always, everybody, anybody, can't, won't, should, shouldn't. Those are unhelpful words in our vocabulary. And I'm going to say in a minute, bring this to someone else because you have only ever experienced your thought process in your head and you need an objective third party. This is why a therapist is great. This is why a coach is great. This is why a best friend is great. Because it's someone needs to hear you say it out loud to go, that's crazy. You're excellent at that. Well, we know why would you, we know why would you think that? Um, so go back through those words and when you find your false narrative, I don't think I'll ever forget the moment when I realized that I believed that things didn't end happy. It rang like a bell in my head. And for a minute, it was kind of all that I could hear. It was like, holy cow, you believe nothing ever ends happily. And I think I had accomplished a fair amount of stuff by that point. So, imagine what I was able to do when I took that shackle off, that yoke off. Um, and so in my personal example, it was that nothing ever ended happily, so I could never be happy or be successful because nothing ever ended well. So why even bother trying. But that belief system that nothing ever ended happy was at the root of my entire false narrative. And that really, it held me back. So we want to identify what it is. And this is hard stuff. And I applaud you guys for being part of this course. I hope that it changes your life or puts you on a path for it, and I hope that you will tell other people about it, and always reach out to me when it gets tough. I am judgment free. There's nothing you can tell me that will shock me. I grew up with some crazy people. I'm kidding, kind of. The second is really challenging the beliefs, and this is where it really gets hard. And sometimes you do need an objective party to listen. So examine the beliefs behind that. I nothing ever ends nothing ever ends happy. Okay, well, that's a pretty easy one because that's so fatalistic and it's so, nothing, always, everyone, once it clicked with me, I was like, "Yeah, that's not helping me at all." Ask yourself, where did that come from? It doesn't always matter where it came from, but to have, I mean, we don't need to do a deep dive, but just to have an acknowledgement of, oh yeah, I can see where I got there, um, from where I started. It is helpful. Let's use the example of, I'm not good enough or I'll never be good enough. What does good enough look like? Because very most of the time we are fighting or measuring ourselves against this undefined specter of greatness, and it is our lowest moments against somebody else's highlight reel. And she could have a nanny, a maid, a cook, a great husband, money, or whatever it is. But particularly when we compare ourselves, I'll never be good enough. We're always comparing ourselves against someone who we think was good enough. And comparison is the thief of joy, my friends. But what does good enough look like? And I think when you start to list it out and really look at yourself and the job that you're doing, you're more than good enough. And this is a great time to take this list to a friend, to your coach, me, and say, okay, here's what I think good enough looks like. Because sometimes we need to be told that is completely unrealistic. Nobody can do all those things, right? I call this Pinterest syndrome, where everybody's so perfect looking on Pinterest and gets everything, whatever, does the little bento boxes for their kids and the apples are cut out in dinosaur shapes and all that stuff. Forget about it. Um, my nothing ends happy was a lot easier, as I said. So good enough is tough. Understand that that is a comparison that you're making, and whatever. And y'all can take these to me in private chat if you're brave enough to do it in our public chat. We can hash through some of these, but it is imperative that you challenge these beliefs because they have run unfettered and unchallenged in your head as long as you've been alive. And so today's the day that you stop them in their tracks and you quit renting them space in your head and you quit letting them rob you of your joy and your success and your happiness. And then finally, we're going to rewrite the script with compassion. And most of us lack self compassion. I learned this in therapy over the last 2 years. I lack self compassion. Compassion with other people, but we're so hard on ourselves. We are our own worst critic. So yeah. So step three is we've identified the negative narrative. We have challenged the beliefs, and this is a process. This isn't something you sit down and do in an hour. This is something you do over a week, which is why it's really important that you're on live or that you listen to these pretty quick. I can always catch you up, so it's never lost. So when we want to rewrite this, we need to focus on positives, our growth, our strengths, the lessons that you've learned, how far you've come. Oh my goodness, I think how far I've come in 50 years, 35 that I've really been on this growth journey. And so we'll use I'm not good enough again. So I might rewrite I'll never be enough or I'll never be good enough with something like no one is perfect, which is the first thing we need to understand. And holding myself to an impossible version of reality, which we first have to do step two to understand if it's impossible or unrealistic, which most of our standards are unrealistic. Holding myself to an impossible version of reality limits me and my potential. There will always be mistakes. Those are opportunities for growth, and I learn through them, and I can help others learn through that growth. I am on a process. I'm on a process of discovery here. My job is never to be perfect in the moment. It's to always be getting better in the moment. None of us are perfect, even if they look like it on Instagram. They're not. It's just a good camera angle. In my personal example, it was very easy. Once I heard myself say nothing ever ends happily, I thought, you know what? I have as good a chance as anybody. And so I just began to say that I am charmed and I can build the life of my dreams. And I went about that with a really great husband. And I'm happy to report that by and large we have done that. But the mind shift, I can't imagine where I would be without the mind shift. And the mind shift came because I was put before great speakers in great rooms through the direct selling industry, which is why I'm such an advocate of that platform and that business model. Is it absolutely changed my life because of the people that it put me in front of. So that's the success work this week, is to identify your negative narrative, your false narrative, challenge the beliefs, get some help from a friend, reach out to me, please, and then start to rewrite it with compassion. This is the beginning of a process that's probably going to take you 6 months to fully work through. So I guess a little good news, bad news is that you don't have to do it all this week, but it's a process to go through and to deal with. So that is session 2. Does anybody have any questions before I stop the recording? I hope I remember to start the recording. I did.
Okay,
All right, so that is session 2. We'll see you next week. Please reach out to me with any questions. I know this is kind of heady, tough stuff that we don't always think about every day, but this is where your greatness is made, in thinking big thoughts and doing big things. So I appreciate y'all being with me. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.